This one's working. Hey PSL, it's your Mayor Greg Oravec, and I'm joined today in our very large TV studio. Normally PSL TV 20 is over communications, but in the age of COVID-19, we'll take all of the volume in a room we can get to appropriately distance. And we're going to talk about hurricanes mostly today, and you might recognize her from her red jacket. I'm so glad that she wore it. This is our Emergency Operations Administrator, Christina Proulx. You might not see Christina all the time out there. It's because she's so busy with her team working hard to keep us safe and as prepared as possible to face any emergency that might strike. And we know that every year we have to get ready for hurricane season, don't we, Christina Proulx?
Absolutely. It's something that our residents don't take lightly. It's very, very nice to see how engaged they are, and they were looking for a Hurricane Expo this year, and we certainly weren't able to do that because of COVID. But this is one more way that we can push outreach and education to our great residents here in Port St. Lucie. So one thing that we were going to do today was just run through what the Atlantic hurricane season outlook looks like, and then in addition to that, what we can do to prepare and what we can do to prepare during COVID, because that's what we're experiencing this year, and it's certainly going to take a different level of preparedness. So we'll go ahead and run through this, and then we'll take questions afterwards. So the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season outlook, I know you've all been following the news and watching the weather. We are looking at 13 to 19 named storms this year, 6 to 10 of which are expected to be hurricanes, and of that, 3 to 6 are expected to be major hurricanes. So the past few years, we have had a higher than normal or a more active hurricane season, and this season certainly is no different. We very, very much want to push preparedness and make sure that we are focused on our homes, our families, our pets, our neighbors. So in taking that to account, it's been so active this year. We're already on the letter F of the alphabet.
Christina Proulx, speaking of the alphabet, and we always have new people moving to Port St. Lucie. It's one of the great things about a growing, vibrant community like ours. 5,000 or so people move here every year, many of them from outside of Florida. So just starting with some of the ABCs, if you will, of hurricanes, when is the hurricane season?
Sure, absolutely, thank you. So hurricane season 101, hurricane season runs from the beginning of June, so June 1st, all the way through the end of November. And it's important that we stay vigilant that entire time. So I thank you, Mayor Oravec, for bringing that up. It's so important that residents are prepared. And what we love is June 1, we'd love to be prepared. But for those of us who have crazy busy lives and who are still focused on everything else that's going on around us, it's still not too late to prepare. We do ask you to continue to do that. And then if we continue on with the alphabet there, it's something that's pushed out every single year, and there's storms, and as you can see here, there's already names that are picked, and we basically just go through that one at a time, and as they're out there in the Atlantic, they get marked off, and then we move on to the next name.
So today we are filming this session on July the 8th. Just so happens to be my 20th wedding anniversary with Tanya. So I'm just throwing that in there, just for fun and because I love her so much. But June 1st was the beginning. We're on July 8th. How many storms were we into before the season even began? Were we 3 storms deep or so before the season even began this year?
We were 2 just before, and within the first couple of days, I think we got our 3rd, which is crazy. So we know that the sea surface temperatures are higher than normal. The other day, I think out in my area, it was 94
so
degrees.
If you ever see SSTS or something like that when you're watching the Weather Channel, or that guy that always finds the waves crashing on him, that's the sea surface temperature.
Yeah. So I always struggle it's like a tongue twister for me. But yes, absolutely, it's not just hot outside; it's hot out in the water, and that certainly creates the perfect environment for these storms to.
So this is for history. This is just for history. So don't send any nasty grams my way. But if you're a lifelong Floridian like I am, you may have grown up studying hurricanes, and then of course, if you went to the University of Miami and engaged in some of the studies I did, you might have taken some courses. And of course, the history on hurricane names is they used to be ladies' names. They used to be names, and I don't know what the people at the time were thinking, but they thought that they maybe had a mind of their own and would go wherever they wanted to go. So they used to be female names, of course, and now, of course, we're much more enlightened than that, and they alternate. And if you have too many, well, then what happens then?
We basically just start back over. So if, gosh, I hope that hasn't happened. That would be something that...
I think we went Greek alphabet in one of the last really busy years. I don't know if it was 2005.
I'll have to look that up.
So.
I'm curious to see when the last time that was.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. I've taken you off course.
You know what?
Very unpredictable. I took you out of the cone of uncertainty. And but back to you, ma'am.
You know what? We'll talk about cones of uncertainty later too, because I think that's always been a bit of a question that people do have. But for those of you who are tuning in, what I did do today was I just looked at the National Weather Service and the National Hurricane Center are showing exactly what's out there right now. So although we don't have anything that's looking to affect us now, this is a great place for you to continue to get your news. And your updates for the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico there too. So as of 2 o'clock today, this is what it looked like. And with a 5-day forecast, that tropical disturbance out there is expected to develop. I believe it's a 70% chance right now of developing. So it's definitely it's quick. It's quick how much it happens. Typically we get notice with hurricanes 5 to 7 days, but sometimes we're not always that lucky.
And just to follow up, it is that we go to the Greek alphabet, and it was in 2005. Bam!
Oh, he knows his stuff. See, I'm all, I'm going to check. I'm just going to double check.
You hedged. That's fine. That's fine. And then we did our research. That's how you have to do it.
Thank you. So for those of you who are Floridians your whole life or have been here for a long time, you're real familiar, I'm sure, with the difference between a tropical depression, a tropical storm, and a hurricane. But we do, as the mayor said, have a lot of residents who are moving here. You said $5,000 a month?
$5,000 a year.
Thank you, $5,000 a year. That would be crazy.
Wouldn't it? That would be.
$5,000 a year. So a tropical depression typically maxes out about 38 miles an hour, and then you see it become a tropical storm, which can max out at 73, and then your hurricane, which absolutely we're expecting to have something in that range this year. So the hurricanes are in the 74, 75 mile an hour range. So what's the difference between a watch and a warning? We get that question a lot, so we figured we'd throw that in here. The watch and the warning differs simply just if you are expecting a watch to come through, it's typically a 48-hour warning that it could be possible for coming, whereas a warning itself is it's physically expected to come our way within 36 hours. So you would get your watch before your warning.
Yeah, and just think about it just in common language. I want you to keep a lookout for that storm out there. I want you to watch because we're not sure exactly where it's going. It could be coming this way. We're in the cone. Let's watch. And then warning is, okay, we're definitely on the path. Let's batten all the hatches. Let's make our final preparations and expect the conditions to occur.
So this is something that we typically put in all of our PowerPoint presentations or presentations that we give out to the community. So what I'd like to encourage you to do right now is just to watch the difference. So at the top of the screen there, you can see that it says June. So as we go through, it'll change June, July, August, September, October, and November. And the lines represent the paths of the storms over that time frame there. So it shows 1851 all the way to 2017, and we'll get an updated one again this year from the National Weather Service. So go ahead and watch those lines and see what the difference is here. So we're in June now, and pushing into July, it's starting to heat up. So keep in mind, our water temperature now is in the 90s. So moving into to August, you see it get a lot more active.
This is really great if you're interested in storms and the mechanics and history, and you're wanting to learn more about hurricanes. Do you have any of the slides in this presentation about the mechanics of the hurricane itself?
In what way?
As far as how a hurricane works, and that it's just basically a giant heat pump. You
No.
know, you brought up this great point about the sea surface temperatures, the surface sea temperatures, your SSTs and whatnot. And really a hurricane's just a giant heat pump, and you have a group of showers that forms, and then the spin of the earth. that actually can bump them into gear and get the whole thing to start spinning around an axis. And it basically is a giant heat pump that's exchanging heat from the ocean, and then it's creating the storms and it's transferring that energy somewhere else. And so you're seeing those mechanics and the underlying sea surface play out into your historical charts, because in June, you only saw a couple squiggly lines. You only saw 2 pieces of spaghetti. It's not even a good plate of spaghetti. But now here, as you progress, we're seeing more and more of the tracks, if you will. And that is because in the background, as we're cranking through the summer, and that heat is just, the sunlight is just pounding the tropical and subtropical Atlantic there. It's bringing those temperatures up, and that's fuel for the hurricanes. And you're seeing more fuel, and then perhaps better atmospheric conditions, more storms. So we're just seeing all that play out. There's a lot going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we always say August, September, and October is the peak of hurricane season. This is a nice depiction, and it shows you historically that it has been and it continues to be the peak of hurricane season. And as it gets, as you said, Mayor Oravec, as it gets that fuel from the water, it certainly has the ability to strengthen as it approaches the coast. So here's August, September, much busier than June, as you can see. October, still very, very busy. And then in November, although it's still hurricane season, we don't see storms come through typically. So what's important to remember, though, during this time is it only takes one storm to cause so much damage that it can change our lives for years and years and years. So it's important to remain vigilant. It's good to do that for your families, and it's good to do that for your neighbors. And just remember that even though November might not be a month that we see any storms, it is still within that realm. So
that's such an important point, and I just want to underscore it. Hurricane Andrew was devastating to South Florida, to Homestead and South Miami-Dade County. And obviously Andrew starts with A. And it was late in the season. I think it was August. And to your point, it only takes one. So you could have a slow season, let alone a busy season, but a slow season, and it goes the wrong way on you and lines up. It makes landfall in your neighborhood. That's all it takes is one to devastate a community, and that's why we have to take it seriously.
Absolutely, and I know we've spoken about it before. I was just a young kid when it came through, and I was living in Miami at the time, and I don't remember a whole lot when I was that age, but I do remember driving through and just my parents driving us through and seeing that devastation and destruction following that storm. And it's certainly eye-opening to see it in person and not just to see it in the pictures. So while we're talking about big storms, let's go ahead and talk about the SaffirSimpson Scale and what that means. So your different categories, 1 through 5, as we said before, it goes into different wind speeds, and that also correlates to the damage and the destruction. So category 1, the damage can be very dangerous with the wind still, but typically there's always some damage there. And as you go on through, you see in a 2, 3, 4, and 5, a 2 is extensive damage, a 3 is devastating damage, a 4 is catastrophic, and a 5 absolutely is catastrophic and whatever beyond you can imagine. So what does that truly mean? What's the difference between a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, and a 5? So one thing that the National Weather Service always says is that it doesn't increase linearly, it increases exponentially. So let's see visually what that means. What's the difference between a 1 and a 2, a 3, a 4, and a 5? Well, I've lived through a 1, I can take a 2, no problem, no big deal. It's just a 2, I can do it. Well, let's see what the difference is. So that's your scale, and it's showing how it increases exponentially. So between a 1 and a 2, you're getting a 10% increase in damage. Between a 2 and a 4, a 250% increase in damage. That's just terrifying when you really think about it. The other thing that I thought was interesting when we were throwing this together was that the major hurricanes only account for 21% of U.S. landfalls, but 83% of damage. So when we say, Mayor, it only takes one, you could have one storm push through that much damage, and it shows the difference in potential damage right there. I mean, if you have a major storm come through, and major storms, as you know, are 3, 4s, and 5s, it can just completely change your entire life. So one thing that we did go ahead and add in here, I'm a visual person, Mayor Oravec. I know you like to see this too, and make sure that the public is able to kind of just have graphics side by side. So this was a nice visual, I think, to show the difference between some of the major storms that affected us in the 04-05 time. I know that we had Hurricane Matthew and Irma, and we just had Dorian come through last year, but these are major category storms, which again are 3, 4s, and 5s. So Francis and Jean both came through in 2004, and Wilma came through in 2005. You can really see the difference there in the size, especially with Wilma. And later what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what that difference in size means. Does the size matter? Does the speed matter? How does the intensity affect our area? So like I said, I do like visuals, and those of you who are watching here on Facebook Live, I'm sure you're able to see as well. So the last 2 main storms that we were impacted here, physically impacted by any type of winds or rains from any kind of tropical storm or hurricane, was Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Matthew. So with Hurricane Irma there, you can see coming off the Atlantic that the red there is actually the path, while the yellow is the cone of uncertainty, and it's so important to know the difference. And I apologize, I think I'm getting ahead of myself here a little bit. The red coming through is your actually physically impacted area, the direct path there, whereas the yellow is still the areas where you're experiencing the winds and the outside impacts of the storm. So if you look closely on your screen, you can see that we're just outside the red. So I mean, that was a close call right there for us. And one of the questions that we typically ask is, what category storm impact did we have from Irma? And we asked the same question for Matthew. So here's Irma, and here's Matthew. And here is just the opposite.
Will you go back to Irma for a second?
Of course.
So to your point, you're talking about the local impacts, maybe what our residents' experiences were, and then the cone of uncertainty. So this graphic, which shows the tropical storm force winds and the hurricane force winds, now Irma caused millions of dollars of damages here, but at the same time, if you thought in Port St. Lucie you went through the full force of a hurricane with Irma, you didn't. You had tropical storm impacts, and that's what the orange is showing you. But that's the difference that 30 miles makes. That's the difference that 50 miles makes. That's the difference of the cone of uncertainty. That's why everyone in the cone of uncertainty has to take it seriously, because one jog to the left or the right is how different your experience can be. So looking at a map like this, if you've driven the state, you know that's Lake Okeechobee, you know what Tampa Bay is, you know where Fort Myers is, you know where PSL is. 30 miles one way, completely different experience. You go from having tropical storm force winds, which frankly sometimes we can have in a bad thunderstorm, to hurricane force, sustained hurricane force winds, and that's a huge difference. And I think on your next slide, we're going to see where, maybe even you went through hurricane, but there's an exponential difference between 75-mile-an-hour winds and 135-mile-an-hour winds, especially sustained.
Absolutely.
And that's why you have to prepare anytime you're going to be in that cone.
And I think that's a really, really good point. When we talk about that cone of uncertainty and the potential shift that it can make, with your greatest damage typically with your wind speed coming through directly in the middle, I mean, if that just shifts just a little bit, I mean, you can see right there in Irma, and then in Matthew, we really lucked out with how close we are to that main path of that storm. When we talk about tropical storm force winds, we experienced 100,000 cubic yards of vegetation on the ground for both of these storms. And as you said, yes, the storms may have been a certain category, but we only experienced tropical storm force winds. So what does a category 1 look like for us? What does a category 2 look like? And then not even thinking, okay, what does our town look like if we get hit with a major category storm? And that's why preparedness is so important, to ready your homes and your families. And we always say neighbors because we care about each other here, and we want to keep that preparedness level. We want to keep that resiliency here in our community, and it certainly comes down to our team. Our team includes you. We can't recover quickly unless we have your help.
Is that Councilwoman Carballo out there?
Hey, everybody.
Who's the other? Is that Mama Vicente? I don't know. Yes, I couldn't tell with she has a full mask.
Here joining us, but they're following that social distancing, and thank you for coming in, and they're also making sure to wear their face coverings. So that's nice to see, and you can see Mayor Oravec and I here are definitely making sure we're sitting 6 feet apart. We always have our masks on us. He's got his mask there. I've got my mask right here in my pocket. So we're taking it seriously and making sure that this emergency, and hopefully we're not in another emergency, that we're always prepared and keeping ourselves safe. So I think this is a nice depiction of the size of a storm and what's important about that. So one thing that we talk about a lot, I think that's Charlie, the little tiny one there on the left, the different type of damage and destruction that is experienced, and the size of the storm and the speed of the storm. So you can see Irma there, 2017 versus Sandy, Sandy versus Charlie, much, much larger. And I think what's important to remember is that when we're talking about the speed of a storm, a lot of times people say, oh, you know what, it's slow, it's not going to be a big deal. But one of the greatest and most damaging impacts from a hurricane is the rainfall and the flooding. And if a storm sits over you like Dorian did in the Bahamas, and it just hammers you, even if the wind's not bad, if it just pours and dumps rain on you for hours and hours and hours, no matter how good the drainage systems are in your area or here in Port St. Lucie, I love our drainage system here, is with how well it works. If it just downpours for such a long length of time, you're going to have flooding no matter where you are. So it's important to remember that. And then the size of the storm matters too, because if you have a large storm that is coming through slowly, you have to sit under that storm as it slowly passes by. It's just the opposite there. If you have a small storm, but it's significantly powerful, it can cause extreme damage with wind too.
Well, look, if you're going to have to be in a situation where you're rooting, of course you're rooting for no hurricanes.
Yes.
But if you have to root for a weak, fast one.
Yes, weak and fast is the way to go.
But, and I always feel badly about rooting for it to go right or left, because if that means it's hitting someone else, it's kind of hard to feel good about it. Dorian was the worst of both worlds because it was slow-moving and powerful. And so what we find is that the main impacts are rain and wind. And so a lot of times you could have what would they call a wet storm that floods, but maybe it's not that strong a wind. Sometimes you have strong winds, but it's fast moving, and so you're not gonna get flooded out. But unfortunately, sometimes you can have both. You can have the powerful, slow moving wet storm, and that's really, again, that's the worst. That's what you don't want to see. You made this comment about you love the drainage system, and I'm glad that you said that, because drainage is actually one of the biggest complaints we get in the city of Port St. Lucie. Statistically, it's actually the #1 complaint this year, and usually every year. And it's because so many people are new to the area, and they may not have had the experience of understanding that Florida is flat and used to be very swampy. And as a result, there's not a lot of pitch, there's not a lot of slope for the water to run off fast. So it's slow moving, and it doesn't necessarily percolate right away. And even though that can be an inconvenience for us, it's actually a good thing, because if it went really fast, it would bring more pollutants to the river and in the Indian River Lagoon. So that is the Florida system. That's why we have an Everglades. That's why Lake Okeechobee was just a spoon that spilled off water and into the Everglades. So that's how the system works. And here in Florida, and especially this part of Florida, your street system is actually designed to hold water in flood situations. And the idea is that first the swales fill up, right? Then the street fills up. And hopefully, if the system is working, the system discharges water into the receiving bodies. The lakes fill up and they go into the conveyances, the ditches, and the canals that lead to the lagoon, the river, St. Lucie River, the Indian River Lagoon, and the ocean, because ultimately all the water eventually gets out to the ocean. But the idea is that that water can flow without it staging up high enough to flood your structure, your house, or your business. So to me, a flood problem was always watching the poor people in the Midwest and watching a house actually flow down the Mississippi River or the Missouri, or that seems like that's terrible flooding when a house actually is going downstream. Our experience in Port St. Lucie, even during a super soaker like Faye, which flooded the eastern side of the city, was really predominantly street flooding, wasn't structural flooding. There's a little unincorporated county pocket where you have the bagel shop and the tackle shop there, Billy Bones. That flooded, but that was the exception, not the rule. We've had some isolated flooding out in St. Lucie West. There's maybe one or two houses here or there, something weird happened, but overall the system, to your point, does work very good normally.
I mean, other than the off chance of a basketball being in a culvert or something like that, I think that we have a tremendously fantastic working drainage system. Our building department, our public works department make sure, as you said, Mayor Oravec, the streets flood, and the reason the streets flood is so that your homes don't. And then the hope, as long as nothing's in there blocking those drainage systems, is that then it does secede fairly quickly after that. So another graphic here, when we were actually just talking about Hurricane Faye and the amount of rain that it dropped, and I was surprised to see how much it did. So when we looked it up, 27.65 inches of rain in the time that it was over our area, and that was just 8 miles northwest of Melbourne. So that's certainly close enough for that impact to be near our area.
So if you get really geeky with this stuff and you really get into it and you're really picking up on the different names and terms and concepts, one of the things that can happen, it's called training, and in the thunderstorms, depending on the rotation of the system and how everything lines up, you can find yourself in a train of severe storms that they tend to track along a certain axis. And if you find yourself in front of a train or on the path of a train, it's very bad. And that's really what happened to the east side with Faye. So it just lined up. And actually you saw this to a lesser extent recently in Hope Sound in southern Martin County just this year. I mean, just sometimes the storms line up in such a way that certain areas just get it terrible. And that's what happened to eastern Port St. Lucie. US 1 was flooded, Leonard Road was flooded. The city manager of the time, Mr. Cooper, he turned his SUV into a submarine. I called him a U-boat commander after that. So, I mean, and that experience gave rise to the Eastern Watershed Improvement Project. Yeah. So even though there was limited structural flooding, just to that unincorporated county pocket predominantly, people of Port St. Lucie said, well, we're glad that our houses didn't really flood, but we want a higher standard. We don't want there, under any circumstances, even if Tropical Storm Faye hits, we don't want water in the road for 2 weeks. And so the city and the citizens that came up with the plan, they funded it through an increase in the stormwater fee, and they replumbed eastern Port St. Lucie at a cost of $35 million.
That is a beautiful project out there, and it certainly works. I know the flooding it seems to have been fixed almost
knock on wood. That's right.
Yes, knock on wood. So it's a beautiful project. It looks great, but it's there for a reason, and the purpose is for flooding. And we're actually going to talk about mitigation here in a little bit, but that's a perfect example of a mitigation project. Finding a problem, identifying that problem, and fixing that problem so that in the future you don't have or experience as much of an impact. So in talking about mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery, these are the 4 stages within emergency management. Depending on which agency you talk to, sometimes there's a couple more in there, prevention and protection. But the 4 phases here in Port St. Lucie that we go by as a national standard are these here: mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery, and what that looks like. So at a municipal level, mitigation, we do large-scale projects like EWIP, the Eastern Watershed Improvement Project out there by Leonard Road. We work on communications and making sure that we have lines underground to communicate with the county, that we have backup and redundant systems, that we have generators at all of our major facilities to make sure that if we lose power, we're still able to be here making the biggest effort that we can to respond as fast as we can. Preparedness. Preparedness is something that we do year-round. Whether we experience 3 and 4 or not, response and recovery, we're always in mitigation and preparedness throughout the year, no matter what we're doing. What does preparedness look like? Preparedness is training and exercising. It's educating ourselves and educating residents. It's making sure that we have plans that are up to date and plans that are practiced and shared. And of course, if we do have any kind of emergency, here we're talking about storms or hurricanes, what we jump into is response. So immediate response to that emergency or that storm. And one thing that we see in response, especially here in Port St. Lucie, is that our residents are heavily, heavily involved in that. In preparedness, we see residents outside making sure that their homes are ready right before, that their neighbors are safe and ready to hunker down if they need to. And then following, we see our residents come out immediately following, and they're making sure to help us to help them. Recovery, of course, can last for years and years and years, depending on what kind of impact you have. And recovery is where you're able to reach out to your local agency or your state or federal agencies for assistance sometimes if there's financial need as well due to damage or destruction that insurance may not be able to assist with. So I think if we talked about, Mayor Oravec, the 4 stages, not so much at the municipal level, but at the homeowner level. So what can they do to mitigate, to prepare, respond, and recover? So I was kind of thinking about that today.
Well, that's a great question. And so for me, having had the experience of going through a few and observing it over a lifetime that's getting longer every year, obviously, mitigation, I want you to make sure you have all the tie downs on your roof. So if you didn't get the extra, somehow you made it now to today without tie downs, I want you to have tie downs, because if you have your roof at the end of the storm, you're in a relatively good position. Yeah. So we want you to have your roof. And of course, we can't make any assumptions. So let's just say shutters. You have to have good shutters.
And I think a lot of times in the mitigation and preparedness side of it, we see residents, like we talked about the Hurricane Expo earlier and how we do that annually, and we weren't able to do it this year and have 3,000 people due to COVID in one room. But what we see is different mitigation a lot of times each year. If you don't have time or money to dump all of it into 1 year, you can always stretch it. So me personally, the first house that I owned, my husband and I worked to do the things that we knew were most important first. So we first did shutters, and then we saved up, and a little while later we worked on gutters to try and keep the rainfall from coming directly into a certain area of our home. So when we talk mitigation, I think it's important for residents to remember we don't always have to do it all at once. If you have to put up plywood for now, we put up plywood. And in 1 year, I'd like to say, hey, we're going to take those shutters and not have to drag them out, especially a few times a year sometimes. And maybe 1 year we'll be able to buy impact windows.
So the thing that I've experienced with impact windows, because we have some, and like if you have a large sliding glass door, it might cost as much as a small car. Yeah. Very expensive. So the impact glass will keep it from breaking in penetration, but it won't stop it from cracking. And so you still got to replace that glass. So I find that not only do we have impact glass, we still put our shutters up. But an aspirational goal, like if you really were planning and you wanted to make the investment, oh man, do I love the roll down shutters, yeah, or the one you hit the button on. Those are, and we have this great, one of the leaders in shutters, expert shutters here in Port St. Lucie. They just actually won a state award, and they're one of our economic development success stories. So just happy to give them a plug. But you have these different shutter systems, but hurricane glass, not only good for hurricanes, good for sound and good for energy. So totally support what you've done there. The tie downs, what a great point did she make about things that are specific to your property. You have a property where you have ponding water against the wall of your house. You don't want that, especially after 20 inches of rain, because you'll find that that water has nowhere to go and finds a way to infiltrate your house. And so if you have a sunken living room, all of a sudden it is a shallow pool that you didn't want to have, and everything in there, including the drywall, now has to be ripped out. So how might you mitigate on your property? Here's one. Let's trim our trees before the hurricane watch.
Don't do it
or the hurricane warning. It's totally natural. I understand why we do it, but we're really just putting out projectiles out there, and it's a problem every time.
Every year.
So hey, you know what? As part of spring and early summer, when we're getting outside and enjoying living in Florida and being outside, let's trim our trees then, if we can.
Absolutely, and when we talk through, let's so for preparedness now, I think that's a great tip. We talk about making sure that our homes are ready. It could be hurricane shutters, generator, anything that you need. But on the preparedness side, what can we do to be prepared? How do we prepare our homes, families, pets, neighbors? So those are the typical 4 that we talk about.
Well, you're going to bust out your list, right? Well, we definitely have a list on our on our website.
Webpage,
so
yes.
when we get into preparedness and preparation, have your actual hurricane list.
Yep, and on the city's website, we have that hurricane guide. It's a nice front and back. You can keep right on your fridge. When we have the expo each year, we laminate them, and people said that they use them year after year. So the city's website is a great tool, a great reference. cityofpsl.com/EM for emergency management, and I know the county has a lot of great information as well on preparedness. One thing that
Red Cross is
oh yeah,
also
absolutely.
good.
That's my old stomping grounds. Red Cross is a great resource. The one thing I don't know why I didn't think about it when we were talking about it, but when we're talking about shutters, I seem every year to our neighbors would come out and they would just be kind of almost cussing at themselves because they couldn't figure out what window their shutter went on or where their key was for their wing nuts. So it's so important to make sure that you have all that now. Find it now. Don't look for it when you're stressed out. It's the same with buying food. Everyone in COVID went out and they bought toilet paper immediately. So we don't want to see that again. We see the stores finally stocking more of the paper products now, and they're not running off the shelves just as fast as they were before. But that's the same thing with hurricane season. So if you haven't gone shopping yet, it's something that we can start doing now. Each time.
Yeah, take care of that checklist now. We actually already passed the sales tax holiday.
Yep.
So we might say that we're already late, and given that COVID-19 is out there, we always want you to be prepared. We'd rather have you prepared sooner rather than later. This year, though, even more so.
Yeah, so we're saying go out, make sure that you have everything that you need now. Be prepared now. Don't wait until there's a storm. Just like we don't want to cut all of our shrubs and trees right when we have a named storm, we don't want every single resident to run out and to just completely empty all of the shelves. So if there is a financial burden, though, it's something that you can do little by little. So if you go into your local grocery store, just put a few items in your cart that you know that you need to keep in your pantry or in your cabinets for hurricane season, and then the next time you go shopping, you can put more in your cart as well. So what is
tuna fish? Get your tuna fish.
Oh, I hate it, but it's easy.
I love it. But yeah.
So if we go in and we continue with that cycle, what response and recovery look like? So if we do have a storm or a hurricane impact our area, what do we expect to see? So response, typically you see, depending on what type of impact we have. So say in Hurricanes Matthew and Irma, tropical storm force winds, the impact and the response that we saw, the city came together. We made sure that we were clearing roadways as fast as we possibly could, making sure that there was access to hospitals and critical facilities, and our residents immediately started cleaning up their yards, making sure that if they needed any tarps on maybe some of the older roofs that may have had a leak, that they were out there doing that right away. And jumping into recovery, depending on what kind of, we keep running back to impact, depending on what kind of impact we have, it can be a quick recovery, and we can see our city as a whole as one unit, because we are one family, one team here, recover within weeks and sometimes months, and in the unfortunate times, sometimes years. So that's kind of what it looks like here, and that covers somewhat of the municipal side and then somewhat of the side for residents as well.
Just a couple quick notes there, depending on the level of impact. You know, the last couple storms that we've had have just been marginal, near misses really, and some of the things that we had to deal with were debris. We had a lot of debris, and it takes some time to pick it up because you're creating the equivalent of a year's worth of debris in 2 days.
Yep.
or 1 day. And just to set expectations, if you get a major Cat 5 like Andrew, for 2 years in Miami, we had debris on the side of the road like snowbanks, 20 feet high. And it takes a long time to be able to remove all of that debris. And the other thing I'd say is during the response, you know, depending on the level of impact, but certainly if we're dealing with the named storm and we're getting wind impacts, once the wind gets to sustained tropical storm force, we're no longer out on the roads because that's when we're sheltering in place or we're sheltering in our spot. And we now have some different equipment at the fire district and others where they may be able to go out in their tank-like vehicle, but normal emergency vehicles cannot go out once we get to sustained tropical storm force winds. And so that just I always like to remind everyone of that.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to keep our first responders safe so that following emergency they're ready to go. And you mentioned like snowbanks, and it's so funny to hear here in Florida, but I think that's a perfect visual. So when I say in response on the municipal side, the city pushes to the side of the road pushes the debris to the side of the road so that emergency vehicles can get through. And depending on what kind of damage you have, you can see vegetative debris. So we saw a lot of trees and limbs, and that really just kind of cleared out a lot of the vegetation that we had because we hadn't had a storm since the 04-05 storms that really cleared a lot of that out. But we also can see C&D, construction and demolition type material, when you start seeing your roofs, your fridges, all of the white goods, all of the things that you keep in your home to keep your food in, your electronics, everything that just gets wet and dumped and goes to the side of the road too. So we absolutely can see a very different picture of the type of debris that can be out there and on the roads. And depending on what it is, some of it gets picked up immediately and some of it may take longer by the emergency haulers that we do have.
Buy your extra wing nuts now. Yeah. Buy your wing nut drill bit now. So there's just a couple of hacks there to take care of those items on your checklist now. Much easier to source them. Run
your generator. Check your generator if you have one. Now's the time to prepare. We always say before a storm is the time to prepare, not when we have a watch or a warning out there.
And you can't hear the all clear sign if you don't have a radio that runs on batteries and your power's out.
We actually just gave one away today. So we keep going back to the Hurricane Expo and us not being able to have the Hurricane Expo this year. So what we've done is we're doing a contest through social media on the city's Facebook page. Every single month, and we just ask residents to take pictures of the things that they're doing, depending on what the category is. I believe this month is how do you strengthen and protect your home, which is heavy on mitigation. So we just ask residents to take pictures of what they're doing. Some people have submitted pictures of different things they've done around their home, and then the winner will receive a prize. So the prize for June was a hurricane weather radio. Awesome. that got picked up today. So we'll have that picture up on our website too. So we've actually, I think, talked through a lot of this already today.
Yeah, go ahead and bring it to your big finish. And I don't know if the public will have any questions or anything out there. We'll turn it over to them.
So we want to hit home with this. Make sure that you're prepared, and that means your homes, your families, your pets, and your neighbors. Mayor Oravec mentioned gathering food, water. One thing that we didn't touch on was your important documents and your medications. The prize this month is a waterproof and fireproof bag, and that's so important to have something like that so you can keep your important documents in there that your life would just be very difficult to move forward without. There's two other things that we always want to push for. If you feel that you have a special need and you need to be in a special needs shelter, if you require power and don't have that at your home, or if you feel that you may experience power loss, it's important now that you sign up with St. Lucie County for their special needs shelter. Pre-registration is absolutely a must, especially during this time of COVID, so that they know how many residents to anticipate in that shelter. And then there's also something we always talk about, alert notifications and how important those are. So the county also has access and provides access to a system called Alert St. Lucie. And Alert St. Lucie is so nice because it gives you the option to, you can opt in or you can opt out of different things. So me personally, I don't care if there's fog at 2 a.m. So I might not check fog or hail at 2 in the morning. But if there's a hurricane coming or if there's a tornado, I want to know about that and I want to be woken up. So it gives you the option of these are the different things I want to be notified of, and these are the times that I would be interested in hearing about that.
Yeah, set those right, though, because
Yes.
you might get woken up. Then you might be upset. You might not be upset at the county. You might be upset at your mayor and or city council. We don't want that unnecessarily.
Why are you calling me 8 times a night to tell me about fog? I don't want to be
I'm not. Please update.
And then a lot of times residents say, hey, I don't want to be a part of the system anymore. So it's so important to elect the preferences that you prefer most. And again, that's the Alert St. Lucie system. And there's a link to that on the city's website. And then there's also a great way to sign up for that on the county's website as well. So again, the city's website, www.cityofpsl.com/emergency management. And that way you can get your alerts as well. We talk a bit about knowing your evacuation routes and what that looks like, but over the last few years, we've seen a big change in that. And in the emergency management field, we're seeing more and more evacuate tens of miles away and not hundreds or thousands of miles away. So the county and the city have the resources in order to take care of you. We know what this town and this area needs, but if you go and you evacuate and you're not with family, if you just evacuate and go, you just say, hey, you know what, I'm just going to get on the Turnpike or 95, I'm just going to drive north. You aren't going to be necessarily familiar with that area. You may not know where you're going, and it's so important to, in an emergency, to know where you are, who's around you, where you can find things and different resources. So we typically say if you feel that your home is not safe to stay in, depending on what kind of impact we're expected to have, that you evacuate tens of miles away if you can, or within county or within a surrounding county, so that you're not so far away. And then, of course, if you do choose to completely evacuate and get out of the area, we always ask and encourage residents to do it way sooner than they think, because we do not want to see our residents stuck on 95 in a Category 1 storm. So many people get stuck on the highway because they can't get out. So it's important, if you do that, just don't procrastinate. Do it sooner than later. The other thing, well, we mentioned food and water before, making sure that you have that for every member of your family, making sure that you have that for your pets, the same with medications as well. So it used to be 3 to 5 days of food and water, and now with COVID out there, we are recommending 7 days. So if you can have a 7-day supply of those items for your entire household, that's absolutely encouraged. The other thing that we added on this year to this presentation is to update your insurance plans. So make sure that you're checking your insurance plans, making sure that they're up to date. If you live in a flood-prone area, you can certainly look into flood insurance. If you're a renter, you can look into renter's insurance to cover the items in your home should you experience any type of damage. Mary, did you want to add anything on any of those?
No, you can't get insurance if you're in the window, so get it before and just buy your flood insurance, because it's relatively inexpensive to the protection it affords, and you're not covered for flood insurance unless you buy flood insurance. Don't think that that's somehow covered under some other part of your policy. You need to buy it.
Yep, the city actually participates in FEMA's NFIP, which is National Flood Insurance Program, and that's a federal government way of encouraging residents to have flood insurance, and why it's so important. So that's absolutely a more cost-efficient way to buy flood insurance if you're interested. So that is the conclusion of our presentation, and we know that we had residents who were watching run through, and they were interested in asking a few questions here. So we're going to go ahead and run through some of those now.
As our team brings those up, just want to thank you for your hard work, and just cover one of the basics. When we are in our response and recovery, and of course all the time, the City of Port St. Lucie has a council manager form of government, which makes the city manager the chief executive, not the mayor. So we have a lot of fun doing these presentations together and working together, but I'm not your boss. City manager is your boss. So you are his or her, but in our current case, his right hand. So you're running emergency operations, reporting to our city manager, who is the chief executive and our incident commander, and running the response and recovery efforts. And just so many people came from a big city, and they think the mayor does it. And I certainly don't want to pass the buck, but I do want to explain the system. But on behalf of the city council, we're very proud of you and the team and all the things that you do. So thank you for all your hard work.
Absolutely
we appreciate you.
it. We kind of run behind the scenes sometimes, but we love what we do, and our team works really, really hard here to make sure that our residents are safe. And I know you say that you're not in charge, but you certainly are involved. And we encourage you to come out, and you very much were out in the last 3 storms that I've experienced here, and encouraging all of the that's my word of the day, I think, encouraging.
That's a good word.
Making sure that all of our staff were getting everything that they needed out there in the EOC or Emergency Operations Center. So thank you for expressing your gratitude to the team.
Well, it's a pleasure to serve and to serve with you. And if you believe in public service, then this is really what it's all about. When things are at their worst, we have to be at our best, and this is why we're here.
Agreed. So just run through a few questions. Kimberly was asking about trees that were growing in the canal behind them, and when that would be cleared. I think that's a great thing to bring up, and making sure to communicate with the Public Works Department. So got a frog in my throat. I'm sorry. So if you do reach out to the city, ask for the Public Works Department, and you can ask them about your specific canal and let them know that you may be concerned about drainage in that area. And I know that they'll provide you fantastic customer service and make sure that they're looking into that for you.
Well, this is a great opportunity to promote our one PSL system.
Yes.
And I'm sure that our staff can just respond with the link to the one PSL page. But very proud of how the city is going to data-driven response and another level of accountability and transparency. So we now have a information system, a 311 type system, where we can process all of the requests for service that we get, track them, monitor them, figure out what type of concerns we're getting, complaints, opportunities, let's call them. But if Ms. Frizzle will make sure that we provide her a link to the one PSL. If she hasn't reported already, she can, and we can follow up. So there's one PSL, there's going to be a phone number, and there's an app for that. And really anything going on in the city, you'll have the opportunity to put in your request for service. And you can always follow up by calling the City Council office at 871-5159.
Thank you, sir. Another question that we had come in from Lisette is just going through hurricane preparedness for seniors and best practices for their safety. I know that we have a lot of residents here who it seems like a lot of the calls that we get each hurricane season is for children who are grown adults, but children of parents that actually live out of the state, and then their parents live here in Port St. Lucie. And a lot of times it seems like there's not a plan in place just yet for those elderly individuals living here in Port St. Lucie to receive the assistance that they need, because they may not be able to put up their own shutters, they may not be able to get to the grocery store. So I think a lot of preparedness on the senior population is heavily dependent on us and on you. So I think in going through that, it's so important to have a plan. We don't want to wait until the last minute, because it stresses everyone out in your family, and we certainly want to curtail that if we can. So preparedness is so important. We mentioned the Alert St. Lucie application, so that you have emergency notification when something is imminent for our area or something that may be highly likely. The special needs shelter was another thing that we wanted to go through if you do feel that you have either yourself or a neighbor, a loved one that may need to go there should we lose power. And just making sure that we're staying informed. Know your area, know your home, and certainly know what you can do to prepare. So
Yeah, start earlier would be one of my big tips. Start earlier if you're a senior. You know, you're not going to work through the middle of the night. You're not strong enough to put up the shutters all by yourself, or we don't want you climbing on the second story and doing it. So start early and have your plan set. You know, maybe your church group has a shutter brigade and they go around and help each other put each other's shutters up. Those are the kinds of things. It's just about being prepared. But certainly if you're capable of keeping a house, then I think that you'll be able to prepare. You just might want more time, and you'll want to leverage more of your friends and family to help you get ready.
I think that's a great resource, is friends, families, and neighbors to offer assistance. You mentioned also going to your local church or congregation. If you have medications, making sure that you have enough of that
That's huge.
On hand.
Yeah, make sure you have your supply.
Yep. Just and one thing we didn't talk about was safe rooms too. And in a hurricane, if you listen to your NOAA weather radios when they come through, you typically get that warning of impact, and they say find your safe room. Now is the time to find your safe room. And where is that? And in some homes, it's very difficult to figure out what room would be your safe room.
Interior room, no windows.
Yeah.
I like to recommend an interior closet or interior bathroom. At the end of the day, if the stuff is hitting the fan, if you have an interior bathroom, get in the tub, put a mattress over the top. That's my personal recommendation.
Yeah, and you know what? The bathrooms are really, really nice too, because all the plumbing that's in the walls just tries to hold a little bit more together than if you just had a piece of drywall between two rooms and just the studs there. So very, very much so, have a plan, build a kit, be prepared. That's Red Cross saying for years, right? So have a plan is number one. If you don't live here and your parents do, it's still important that we have a plan for them as well. Do I need shutters if I have hurricane windows?
And if you want to give your parents the business, I mean, call them up in May or June if you can't visit, and just say, hey, where are we at with this year's hurricane prep?
Yeah.
You can get them back for all those times they asked you if you were getting ready for the SAT or doing your homework.
Yeah, there you go. So Beth was asking, do I need shutters if I have hurricane windows? Mayor Oravec, I know.
So if they're properly permitted, you don't have to, right? If they're properly permitted hurricane glass, you're not going to be required to shut them. However, if you're like me and don't want to see your expensive window cracked and you already have shutters, you might put them up anyways with the belts and suspenders approach.
Yeah. I mean, we've been talking about parents this whole time. When my folks years ago decided to go ahead and purchase them, I know that within 1 month of their purchase, a rock hit the window coming up from the weed eater, I don't know what it was, and it just put a massive crack down that window, and they had to replace it, and they were so expensive. So when Mayor Oravec says he still shutters, it is for that reason, but the windows are still meant to keep you safe, whether they're cracked or not. So just because it's cracked doesn't mean that we're going to start having impacts inside your home. It just means your window's cracked. And
if you've never watched how they test hurricane glass, Google it. And you'll love to watch that on YouTube as they fire a 2x4 at it. It's pretty neat. And we do have people at City Hall that speak different languages. So never let language be a barrier for service. And a number of the Red Cross checklists and things are in multiple languages. How about pets? What do you have on the pets issue?
So it was either in Irma or in Matthew. I want to say it was in Irma. St. Lucie County designated one of their shelters as a pet-friendly shelter. So the county is responsible for sheltering within our area, just as all counties are. And the American Red Cross helps them out with that. The school board here is a fantastic resource. Many of their schools are shelters. I know that. And we should touch on shelters anyway, I think, today when we talk about COVID and what sheltering looks like and what expectations you may have, so we can kind of maybe settle that a little bit. And going through that, the county typically will identify on their website the shelters that are going to open, and they'll open a certain amount in the beginning, and then as they're needed, they have additional shelters for overflow. So they do have one designated shelter that will allow you to bring your pets there. I do not believe they require registration, but that all will be on their website as well.
And so you made this great point earlier because it really has evolved over time, whereas before there was a move to kind of evacuate everyone. And now it's based on specific conditions and the nature of the storm and the nature of the area that's being impacted. So, you got to watch that storm, and you have to decide, you should decide now under what circumstances would you actually evacuate. So for me, where I live in my house with my modern roof, with my windows, with my shutters, with access to a generator, I'm not going to evacuate. I'm not going to evacuate my family, because I have work responsibilities. Not going to evacuate my family for a Category 3. We've been through it before. We know that the house holds up. If I was close to Indian River Drive and a Cat 5 was coming, I'd be like, Tanya, kids, I want you to go to Papa's house. He's outside of the cone of uncertainty. Or I want you to stay with our friends west of 95. Those are the kind of thought processes that's really involved with planning. And now is the time to be thinking about those scenarios versus the day before.
I do think I'm glad that you brought that up, because a lot of times people come up with one plan, but I think that the plan needs to be able to evolve and devolve depending on what we may experience. So I think that was a great point. You said Category 3, I'm not going, but that may mean that for a 4 or 5, you may decide to leave your home. And I think residents should think through that too, is when we have a storm come through, as a family, we're going to stay here through a tropical storm in a Category 1, but we're new, we don't really know our home, we don't really know what it can sustain, or the roof may already need to be replaced. So we know that if we have a Category 2 or 3 or higher, we're gonna go. So I think it depends on your home. We always come back to know your area, know your home, know your surroundings, and that's one big point to that.
Right, so are you east of US 1? Are you east of the Turnpike? Are you east of 95? Those are kind of different gradients, different lines that I would consider in my decision making.
Yeah. Let's see if we had any more questions, sir. I think
Christina does rock. You're right.
Oh, is there?
Mr. Holmes.
Oh, you rock, Christina. Thank you. Those are nice comments today. We like seeing the good comments. And I think I know I've said it a lot today, but we truly cannot recover as a municipal agency without you. We very much have to prepare together because we have to respond together. So we're very, very reliant on you. I know that you're reliant on us, and I just think of that as a partnership. And I think we're fortunate to live in an area that we have residents who are engaged, and they really feel like they want to be prepared, and that's so important.
It is. We want you to be as ready as possible because we want you to survive any emergency and, of course, recover and thrive. That's what it's all about. We're going to be here for you. Christina and her team are going to be here for you, the whole award-winning staff, all the public servants, 1,100 plus strong at your city hall and your city of Port St. Lucie are going to be there for you when you need us.
Absolutely, and you can call us anytime. I know Mayor Oravec always shares his office number in emergency management. We're 772-871-7340. You can call us anytime. Shoot us an email. We're absolutely here to help. If you feel like you're not sure what to do or have any questions, just give us a shout. We're here for you.
Thank you, Manette. This is my favorite Hawaiian shirt, and I do like to wear it this time of year. And it's one of the great things about Port St. Lucie, right, is our Florida lifestyle. And under normal circumstances, we're only dealing with one natural disaster at a time. It's normally hurricanes for us, and I've always thought of it as one of the prices of living in paradise. Nothing's free in this world. There's pros and cons to everything. There's nowhere I'd rather live than PSL and Florida. But one of the things that we have to deal with is hurricanes. But fortunately, we have systems in place. We have people in place like Christina Proulx and all of our hardworking public servants so that we can deal with it if we unfortunately have to deal with it. And, some people would say, oh, we couldn't possibly get hit this year, could we, with all the stuff that's going on with COVID-19? No, Murphy's Law would tell us as emergency management professionals that this is the year it would happen. And so let's be ready. But thank you again. And Port St. Lucie, we hope that you enjoy the virtual Hurricane Expo that we've put together and these little sessions that we do.
Thank you so much for plugging that. I would have completely forgotten, but that virtual expo is going to be live on the city's website on the 11th, and that's just a really nice compilation from within the city and from our partners. So emergency management from the city and the county partnered to do a quick pre-recorded video. The National Weather Service did one for us. Mike Lyons and Steve Weigel from WPBF Channel 12 and WPTV Channel 5 also did some recordings because they weren't able to give presentations this year at the Hurricane Expo. We've got some on there from our Neighborhood Services Department who is talking on our solid waste, which is Waste Pro. And I know that there's some American Red Cross and some FP&L on there as well. I'm sure I'm forgetting someone or some agency, but it's a nice compilation of not just what we're talking about here today, but what else is out there that we can look to prepare.
Great, thanks again.
Thank you.
And we did it. I think we plugged the 9 a.m. on Saturday, so that's when the public will be able to see the virtual Hurricane Expo, and we look forward to and we pray that we will be back to normal next year and able to get together. Let's hope so. But we'll take it as it comes, and we'll just keep fighting the good fight. Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you, Port St. Lucie.